Welcome to Engaged Company Culture, a podcast directed at you, helping you to stop the employee exodus in your organization. This podcast has 3 different types of episodes. First, you have tips, tricks, observations, stories, research from me, Dr. Catherine Weiberg of Profitable Alignment. Second, interviews with other consultants, other coaches who are here to serve you so you can learn other tips and tricks to engaging your employees, to stop the employee exodus, to consciously create and continue a company culture where people want to be and where they encourage other people to come to work and to become your customers. Third, I interview other business leaders who have engaged company cultures and want to share their stories. You might learn from them how they have applied principles of company culture to increase their employee retention, increase their profits, increase their productivity, and increase everyone's job satisfaction. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Engaged Company Culture. Today, my guest is Jhana Li, the Ops Matchmaker with Ops Academy. Jhana Li has over 4 years' experience as a Chief Operating Officer and Operations Consultant for digital entrepreneurs. She specializes in matchmaking businesses with the operational expertise, system, and team they need to sustainably scale. Her passion lies in scaling purpose-based businesses and partnering with the founding entrepreneurs to unlock their highest potential and impact. I invited Jhana Li to this podcast because additionally, she has expertise in remote culture sustainability. So with everything that she does as a COO, focusing on how things work, culture is a part of it, including digital. Jhana, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, absolutely. I am thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
You said that you have an engaged company culture and that there are some tips and tricks to having a remote culture for sustainability and so forth. I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. So I think we all know, like anybody listening to your podcast, I think we're all operating under the assumption that culture is super important, right? Like we don't need to validate that. In my opinion, in remote workplace environments, it can be even more so, and it can be even more challenging to build. But it's so essential because you have even less visibility into what people are working on. You have even less direct control, because they aren't coming into an office. You can't see what it is they're working on. You can't have, around the water cooler conversations that just sort of spark, right? And so in a remote environment, even though it's harder to build, I think it also becomes more important, because culture is one of these soft levers for growth that sneaks in all of these various ways. And in a remote environment where you don't have that kind of visibility, it can be the determining factor between people working really hard or people showing up, doing the bare minimum, still getting paid full time, but really they're walking their dog and they're doing the dishes and, all of the other things that we get away with in the remote environment. So culture is a cornerstone of motivation. It's a cornerstone of accountability. And it's also definitely a cornerstone of alignment. My team is spread across 3 continents and 5 countries. We don't all operate under exactly the same time zone. So how do I make sure that my team is all moving in the same direction? We're all working towards the same things, even if we're not always online for the same 8 hours every single day, right? So these are the sorts of challenges we run into in the remote environment, where culture, I think, becomes a even higher and more important compound lever for growth over time.
How do you encourage the culture? How do you get the culture through your 3 continents and 5 countries?
Sure. Totally. First off, for anybody who is like really, really seriously wanting to dive into this on a tactical level, there is a book that I would 100% recommend. It's called The Culture Playbook by Daniel Coyle. And it is literally 76 tactical strategies for how to build culture, both in person and remote. So would highly recommend that, but I think we can pull out kind of the best practices. A couple of things. Number one, it's important to remember that in a remote environment, all of the organic culture building, like spark points, moments, will not happen automatically. I think we take advantage of a lot of things just happening organically, happening automatically when you bring people together into a room. People are going to go to the water cooler. People are going to take a smoke break. People are going to like bump into each other in the hallway, right? These sorts of things don't happen in a remote environment. They have to be built in. And so it's things like carving out time within meetings, so across the entire team at a departmental level, where time is being specifically carved out to get to know each other, to engage in cultural conversations and culture building activities. One thing that I just went through with my team today, we all sat down and we discussed our working styles and what allows us to do our best work. How do we communicate well with each other? What's our preferred feedback loop, right? Like people sharing themselves. And there's a couple of like there's the obvious benefits of that. And then there's the secret benefits of that. The obvious benefits of it is like when people are sharing themselves and their preferences, everybody else is now aware of that and you're able to work better together as a team. The secret benefits of that, and one of the core pillars that Daniel raises in his book, is shared vulnerability. Like when you create conversations where people are coming to the table not knowing, not having the answer, especially the leadership. Like as a CEO, I probably say, I don't know, what do you think? All the time, as much as I can. Because when you show up from a place of like, hey, I don't have all the answers, then you invite your team to come into a state, like a space that is safe enough for them to say, hey, I don't have all the answers. And you're able to invite collaboration and culture building and team building in those shared conversations. So shared vulnerability is a really big one, and being super intentional about carving out time for that, recognizing that that is not something that's just going to happen on its own. And so it has to be built in. So things like that.
I love that shared vulnerability piece that you just shared with us, because it is a big deal especially if you want to have a participative, innovative, collaborative environment. People have to be willing to say, I don't know everything. And people have to be willing not to be the smartest person in the room sometimes. Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not. And to be able to give your strengths as compliments to somebody else, and to receive their strengths as compliments to you and somebody else's innovation and creativity. I agree. And I love that you mentioned it has to be specifically built in, because just like you said, you don't have the physical space of running into each other in the lunchroom or in the hallway or by the water cooler. You don't have the time between meetings or before meetings to just sit and chat. And I've seen, especially I saw it during COVID, but I've seen companies build it into their staff meetings. Okay, now we're going to try to do these icebreakers that give us a little bit of insight into yourself. And sometimes those can be really fun, and sometimes those can be tied in. Sometimes it comes down to, like you said, what is your preferred work approach? And I think that is valuable. Also, I love that you brought that one up. I like to ask people, do you prefer text, email, in-person, phone call? How do you prefer, like, for scheduling appointments, or how are you going to respond quickly and easily? What's going to work? And I agree. That is so extremely helpful.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear. No, you're fine. If you have something to add, then.
I was going to speak really quickly to icebreakers, because I think that's one that we try and like, oh, I want to stay away from that. That's so corny. Really interesting. Icebreakers work because they are so corny. If we go into like, what is shared vulnerability? the act of asking that question that makes everybody collectively go like, oh, are we really going to do this? Actually enters everybody collectively into a space of like, I don't want to be here, you don't want to be here, but we're going to do this. And that builds vulnerability, right? Like putting people in exercises, in scenarios where you're asking really difficult questions, or you're bringing up a random icebreaker, or like these sorts of things are strategic and can be super effective. Just remembering what the desired outcome is, right? Shared vulnerability, creating spaces of safety and collaboration and trust, and measuring whether the strategies that you've chosen are actually effective in terms of generating that desired outcome, or are you just wasting everybody's time doing really awkward icebreakers?
So how can you measure that easily?
It's interesting because culture, I always say, is what happens when you're not around. Right?
I agree.
Like you'll know that you have built really effective culture when people start to make aligned decisions without you telling them what the right answer is, without you telling them what the decision should be. And so I think we can't measure like, oh, did that one icebreaker really like hit the nail on the head? But over the course of time and like a series of culture building strategies, what you're going to start to see is that your team is going to start to come to the table with decisions that are all lining up towards shared outcomes, shared behaviors, collective identity. You're going to start to see people take proactive action as opposed to like reactively asking you questions or saying, hey, I'm not really sure how to handle this. Like they're going to proactively make the decision because they feel confident that they know what the right decision is. You're going to start to see the team coming in ready and willing to collaborate because they're starting to understand each other's expertise and learn to rely on each other and trust each other. So how we measure whether or not culture is working is really about having a hyper awareness of team behavior, because there is so much data hidden in how your team behaves today versus how they behaved 3 months ago versus how they behaved 6 months ago.
Absolutely. Thank you. I love that I love that you talked about team behavior. I love that you're talking about over time, people will ask fewer questions and they'll just make the right decisions. They become proactive instead of reactive. One of the big things I like to help people focus on is their group dynamics, whether it's their group formation dynamics or their group behavior dynamics, and really look at both of them. So that's right along with your team behavior, looking at how are people responding to change? How are they responding to suggestions? How are and really tracking that, you can find out who is on board, who is not on board, and why. And so much information that you can glean.
Yep, so, absolutely.
So you obviously have quite a bit of knowledge and experience. We would love to hear how you got where you are right now, a little bit of your path, your leadership development journey, and so forth.
Yeah, totally. So I always say that I stumbled into operations. Before operations, I was quite literally directionless. I was living in a van with my boyfriend at the time, a converted Sprinter van, and we were traveling and living full-time out of the van through North and South America. So we were just traveling all over the place. And it was in that environment that I ended up joining his team, first as ops manager, first as account manager, and then ops manager, and then COO. And I was sort of naturally elevated, I think, into the leadership position almost by default, because there wasn't another operator on the team. And so when I came in, again, originally as an account manager, and just immediately started picking out all of these operational bottlenecks and solving them, not even really knowing what I was doing at the time, it very quickly became clear of like, oh, okay, this is important. We need more of this. We need to elevate this as a voice for leadership in the company. And I ended up running that company with him for over a year. And that was my first like real leadership role. And so much of it was done just intuitively. I hadn't at that point started studying leadership, like really looking at what makes for high performance leadership, what makes for highly aligned and high performance cultures, these sorts of questions. And so a lot of what I was doing in that first year, looking back, was following some of these best practices. I just had no freaking idea that that's what I was actually doing. And so if you're like new in your leadership journey, or like hell, if you're at any stage in your leadership journey, having frameworks around what does strong leadership look like, what does it not look like, what are amazing questions to ask, what are disempowering questions to ask, having just some best practices around how to lead is so helpful. Because even if you're an amazing leader, if you can't tell me why you're amazing at it, then you probably aren't able to also improve it over time. And so whether you're amazing, whether you're terrible, doing some study and recognizing that your own leadership is a core skill that you are developing, and it's a core growth lever in your business, and therefore worth investing time and energy into, is so essential, because it gives you a language, it gives you frameworks, it gives you an understanding of why am I doing it this way? Why is this effective? Or why is this not working? And what do I need to change in order to see, again, the types of behaviors that I want to see from my team?
Oh, that is fantastic. Thank you. I love
Totally.
that story. I love that you stumbled into it and then intentionally took it on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you consciously chose that. Not only was your intuition spot on, but you recognized, okay, I can do better. I've made the improvements here and I can do better. And recognizing in ourselves that we can always improve, and looking at our own stories. That's one of the things I love, is look at what brought you here and what are you going to do about it?
Totally. And I will say that in the moment, my team was giving, that very first year, my team was giving me a lot of feedback about how much they loved coming into work, loved the culture of the company. I was getting a lot of positive feedback from their like conscious brains. From a leadership perspective, I was not seeing the levels of performance that I wanted to see from my team. And that is actually what sparked this journey for me, as far as what does high performance leadership look like, because they can give you all the positive feedback in the world about what a great boss you are. But if at the end of the day, across the board, they're underperforming, balls are getting dropped, people aren't listening, they aren't involving and improving, that's not them. That's us, right? Our teams are just mirrors. Their behavior is just a mirror being held up in front of your face every single day, saying, how are you creating this behavior in them? That could be positive, could also be negative. If you're seeing things in your team that you're not happy with, chances are it's something to do with your leadership style and how, at a intentional or unintentional level, you are building that in. And so for me, it was a big wake-up call that says, you know, I could create a great place to work, but that's different than a high performance culture. And and that is what sparked my learning journey, was figuring out, how do I both create a great place to work where people love coming in, but where they are also producing their best work.
Exactly, because that is vital. You want to have people who want to be there, who connect with the company culture, who connect with the vision and the mission, and who make those objectives happen.
Totally.
Because it's one thing to be a cheerleader, and it's another thing to be the quarterback.
Yep, absolutely.
So, yes, thank you. I am addicted to leadership books and business books.
Yeah, totally. Me too.
That kind of evaluation. So I'm really excited about the book that you recommended. I'm going to be looking that up when we're done, because I thought, ooh, more. I'm always excited about that. But I just love it. It's so very much noticing, what can I do? What can I change about me in order to bring out the best in them? And then they will rise to the occasion. And then what can they do to bring out the best in somebody else? And that can become part of the culture.
Yep, absolutely.
Love it. Oh, goodness. So what do you find most rewarding in what you do as an ops matchmaker?
I really see the operations role as one of the most important within the business after a certain stage of growth, and specifically the relationship between the operator and the business owner, if that person is not the operator, right? Because at the core, I don't know if you've read the book Rocket Fuel on the topic of amazing business books. But Rocket Fuel paints the picture of like this key dynamic that is behind all of the greatest success stories that we see in business. And you have the visionary, who is this like charismatic, out in front, high idea generating leader. And then you have the integrator, who is on the back end, actually turning all of those ideas into a reality. And I have seen this dynamic play out again and again and again and again. Visionaries are incredible at starting businesses. That is where they thrive. But where it starts to break down is in scaling businesses, when things like execution and follow through and systems and scalability becomes the deal breaker between success and failure. And visionaries as a whole tend to not be great at that part. And so for them to recognize that, and partner up with the person whose skill sets shines in that environment, where systemization and standardization and scalability and efficiency is what they live and breathe and love, that partnership of skill sets is what creates immense success stories, unbelievable growth, hyper profitability, etc. And so for me, I think the greatest satisfaction that I get as the matchmaker between these two entities is what any matchmaker would see from seeing like a successful marriage, right? You're like, wow, you guys came together, you complement each other, and it shows. The business is growing, the team is served, the clients are thrilled, right? Like, it is in the pairing of these two superpowers put together that real magic happens. And when I get to be even a small part of that magic, I find it deeply fulfilling.
Oh, that is wonderful. Thank you. I find myself thinking as you're describing everything, rethinking, so where do I fall in this mix?
Yeah.
Which, I've always seen myself one way, but this is one of the reasons I love the podcast interviews, because I also have the opportunity to self-reflect. So in addition to all of the listeners who I hope receive benefit, I receive benefit.
I love it.
And I love it. For me, an ideal day includes a day in which I've learned something.
Yes, couldn't agree more. Which would you consider yourself to be, a visionary or an integrator?
I have previously thought of myself as an integrator, but at this moment in time, I'm thinking more of a visionary.
Yeah. And it's interesting because at different stages of growth, our company will ask different things from us. Like, my career has been entirely as an integrator. When I decided to start my own business, I was put in the visionary role. Like, nobody else was going to be able to fill that for me. And so I think it's a really interesting question from the integrator's perspective of, will I be able to shine brightest starting my own thing and being uncomfortable in that visionary role and learning it, or by partnering with a vision that I really believe in and that I would find deep satisfaction and fulfillment from bringing forward into a reality? And those people absolutely exist.
That is beautiful.
Yeah,
absolutely beautiful. Oh, thank you. So I'm just having fun listening to you. So we've touched on leaders recognizing that their leadership can change, that it can be conscious. You've suggested a couple of books that everybody should read. You've talked about the joy of being a visionary or an integrator, and how those two play together, and how building everything intentionally into your team regarding culture creation and culture continuation, especially with a remote team, how that can look. I know you have way more that you could potentially say on that. But for you, what is the most important thing that you want people who listen to walk away with?
On the topic of remote culture building, I think the biggest takeaway I could probably share from my own experience is that let me say this, there are no wrong cultures. I see a lot of business owners when I start bringing up the concept of core values, culture building, wanting to adopt a series of core values that they think sounds good and they think could be good,
Right.
or even a set of core values that is maybe like aspirational and something that they'd like to be more of or do more of.
Right.
I tested that. I tested that in my own business. Guess what? Didn't work. Or in a past business that I was the COO for, where we set a series of core values that were like, here's where we would like to be and who we would like to become. The reality is that your core values are core. That's
Right.
the point. They are the anchor. They are what is true. They are what is foundational, and they are what doesn't change.
Right.
And so there's no wrong culture. There is just the culture that is more or less authentic. And as the business owner, your whole job is to be the cornerstone of that cultural foundation. And so the more in alignment you can bring your core values to who you are, the stronger that culture is going to trickle down and out and across the rest of your team, because you just showing up as you becomes an expression and a lesson in your core values. When you set a series of core values that are not in alignment with who you are or who you would like to become, you are creating fundamental misalignment between who you are and what you want your business to become. And your team can sense that and they get confused. Your job is to emulate, express, manifest, exemplify your culture in every waking moment. And that is much easier to do when you're not acting. And so my recommendation to you would be to do away with the idea of there being the right set of core values or the right culture that you want to have, and just get very radically honest with who you are. What is unique about you? What is true to you? What are the core and deeply held beliefs that are unshakable? And build a series of core values out of that. My core values, you won't find them in any HR handbook. Integrity, no. Honesty, like what does that even mean, right? Like the generic one line or one word core values that everybody uses, by definition, are not unique and will not serve you. Think about what is unique to you as an individual, build a set of unique core values that is an expression of that, and then filter and be willing to hire and fire and lead by those core values. And you'll find it becoming a competitive advantage and a core differentiator in your business, as opposed to a bunch of words on a wall, which is what it so often ends up being.
Thank you. May we know your core values?
Totally. So I have 4. They each require a bit of an explanation, but I'll try and be quick. My first one is play like a nerd. Play like a nerd. I am a total nerd for operations. I am only interested in working with nerds. I love nerds. And my goal is to have a team that comes together where everyone is an expert in what it is that they do, because they love it and they are passionate about it and they're reading books about it on the weekend, not because I'm asking them to or paying them for it, but because they genuinely want to learn and get better and be nerdy. So playing like a nerd, we have an amazing time every single day, because when you love your work, work is play. And so we show up and we play and we're nerds. So that's number 1.
Love it.
Number 2 is compete with your own potential. So I am not a very competitive person with others, but I am highly competitive with myself. And I have a vision of myself and a version of myself that I am actively becoming. And I see every day as an opportunity to step closer to that person or not. And so I've built my entire team around hyper growth oriented people and around a mindset where we all collectively agree that this company simply serves as a vehicle for our individual growth. And that if we're in a role that has been matched up correctly, us showing up and doing our job is the opportunity to further compete with our own potential. So that's number 2. Number 3 is own your opportunities. This is my version of radical ownership. So again, right, radical ownership, I did not come up with that. There's books and books on why ownership is important as a core value. I just don't call it radical ownership. I call it own your opportunities, because that's unique language that is true to me that I can build collective identity around. So own your opportunities. Every time you make a mistake, every time you fail, every time you fuck up, that is the opportunity to take radical ownership for what happened there, what we can learn from it, and how we can get better. The only 2 words that I've banned at my company are fault and blame. I have no interest in it. And then lastly, Van Talk, which requires the most amount of explanation. But this is my version of honesty, radical honesty. And again, honesty is not my core value. Van Talk is. And it is a specific brand of honesty that I coined and realized when I was living in a van, learning how to live and communicate and travel and run a business with my business partner. And so Van Talk is the process of being as direct and clear as possible with your feedback, with your communication, not allowing the emotional discomfort of a hard conversation postpone it or hold you back from having it. And secondarily, it is a way of receiving feedback where all of that feedback is interpreted as exactly what it is, which is not a malicious or personal attack, but as a genuine act of love and service to help you get better and accomplish a shared goal. It's not a me versus you, it's an us versus the problem. And the problem is standing in our way of accomplishing growth as a company.
Okay, I totally love it.
Yep.
Oh, I hope that everybody who listens or views this enjoys this as much as I am, because I am loving your approach to core values. I am loving your approach to conscious culture creation and continuation. I am loving your approach to operations and recognizing that to be authentic, to use another buzzword, is to really understand who you are. Now, I have another author that I enjoy reading and listening to. His name is Benjamin Hardy. I just listened to 3 of his books recently. And so, of course, I can't remember. Oh, it's Personality Isn't Permanent. I love the book, but one of the things that he said, and I paraphrase, is that your authentic self is your future self. So for me, it's the idea of being true to your future self.
Yeah.
And that's very much like competing with your future self. And
Totally.
So as you were talking, I was like, oh, that resonates with me in this wording. And I totally understand why she's saying that. You know, we hear so many times people say, you need to be transparent, you need to be authentic. And sometimes people interpret that as blunt and abrasive, but it doesn't have to be.
Sure, totally.
It is, who are you, and are you being a true representation of yourself and true to yourself? It doesn't mean you have to tear anybody down.
Right. Definitely.
One of my core things is kindness. You know, I believe in blunt compliments and kind correction. So you can totally correct somebody and give feedback without tearing the person to shreds.
Totally. Yeah.
And it can be blunt Van Talk.
And I think it's an amazing example because radical honesty, Van Talk, I'm sure you have like kindness, right? If we were to put a generic word to all of it, it would just be honesty. But your unique brand of honesty looks slightly different than my unique brand of honesty, which looks slightly different than some other company's unique brand, right? And so the whole point about core values is to individualize them and personalize them, in my mind, because it gives you something. Like if you were to ask in a job interview, hey, would you consider yourself to be an honest person? Who is going to say no to that? Everybody's going to say, yes, of course, I'm very honest. As a core value, that has utterly failed you as far as your ability to effectively filter by whether somebody is truly a culture fit or not. Versus if I can like craft a question specifically around Van Talk, if I can test for it by giving them a piece of direct feedback directly in the interview, which is how I manage this. And I give them a piece of feedback directly in the interview about some part of the application that they could have done better. And I see how they respond to it. Well, now I am exemplifying my own core value by giving them a piece of Van Talk in real time. And then B, without telling them what answer I'm looking for, I'm able to see exactly how they respond and whether they are a core value fit or not. So I think the more weird you can make your core values, the better. And there's a secondary reason for that, which is that language shapes understanding.
Yes.
We are the stories we tell ourselves. Our worldview, our collective identity, our personal identity can be shaped and is shaped by language. And so when you can coin your own language, core values being a primary example of this, around this is who we are, this is how we show up, this is what's important to us. I could have called my core value radical honesty. It could have even done the same thing. But by calling it Van Talk, and then by sharing that again and again and again with my team and saying, hey, need to have a quick Van Talk with you, I'm building it in to the language and the collective identity of the company. And that is how they start to perceive themselves. One of my favorite metrics for figuring out how well have I done a good job of onboarding, training, and cultural immersion is to see how long it takes for a new hire to start incorporating the language of my core values. How long does it take between when they join the company for them to use the word Van Talk? And if I can shorten that, that means that I've done an amazing job of building at a subconscious and conscious level a cultural understanding that they're getting from all angles, not just my onboarding process, but every team huddle, every one-on-one they're having. And that's all just a reflection of culture being shown back to them.
Ooh, I love that. I find myself thinking of jobs that I had as an employee and thinking of how that verbiage and so forth showed the culture. And I'm thinking of a couple of very specific jobs that I had. It's fascinating to compare and contrast. There's one from 20 plus years ago that I'm remembering that everybody was talking the same language. And then there's another one where people were constantly saying, okay, now wait, what does that mean? And I don't understand that. The departments were more divided there. And it's just fascinating because every organization has an overarching culture and then subcultures.
Totally.
But looking at how the subcultures fit within or fight against the overall culture. Very telling. Very telling.
Yep.
Oh, fun. So now we've gone off on a whole other tangent.
Yeah, totally.
Which I think is great. I would like people to be able to reach you. Of course, we're going to have your contact links in the show notes, but what's the best way for somebody to reach Jhana Li, the ops matchmaker at Ops Academy?
Yes, totally. So we are actually undergoing a bit of a rebrand right now. So I will say that the best way to get in touch is still going to be my website, which is www.jhanali.com. And that we'll keep that URL live. That will redirect you back to the best way to get in touch with me, get in touch with the team, and learn a little bit more about what it is that we do over as ops matchmakers.
Jhana, you are amazing. I am so grateful that you have been here today, and thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to or viewing today's Engaged Company Culture episode. I hope you have enjoyed the episode. I hope you have learned something and have something that you can apply today to engage your company culture and encourage your employees to enjoy work. Looking forward to Mondays instead of only looking forward to Fridays. If you liked this episode, please share it with someone else you know. Also, like and subscribe to Engaged Company Culture anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you and have a wonderful day.